Having choices is good, and checking accounts are no exception. At Sandy Spring Bank, we have a variety of checking options and make it easy to choose based on your needs. Mobile deposits and payments, interest checking, or checking with no fees or minimums. Best of all, we'll help you select the account that suits your life. What's your next financial destination? Sandy Spring Bank. Visit sandyspringbank.com/checking. Member FDIC.
Across the Sky is proudly sponsored by Weather Call Services. Don't be caught off guard in severe weather. Choose Weather Call.
Welcome, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast, our Lee Enterprises National Weather Podcast. We are here today with my weather brother, Sean Sublett, just the two of us today as we get into June. Happy climatological summer, Sean, and maybe not so happy start to hurricane season.
Yeah, hurricane season comes whether you want it or not. It starts on June 1st, goes to November 30th. You know, one of the things I always want to drive home in this day and age is that, yeah, it starts on June 1st, and there will probably be a handful of storms between now and the end of July or early August. But, man, it is mid-August to mid-October that is the worst. Climatologically, that is the worst. Too many times, you know, it's gotten to be the end of July and people are like, where are the hurricanes? And then August hits and bang, zoom, they're everywhere. Like, that's kind of the way it works. It takes a while for the ocean to get sufficiently warm. Now, having said that, Joe, you and I both have seen that the Atlantic is warm as it's been, like, on record. So this is going to be an interesting season just scientifically. And then another whole thing as to how much damage may or may not happen.
You look at the hurricane forecast and everything just points towards storms, and more storms. Is there a limiting factor? You know, you said it, Sean, I'll say it here. It only takes one storm for it to be active near you. If there was only one hurricane all season long and it was at your house, you'll remember it forever. So we're very happy and honored to have on Mike Brennan as our guest for today's podcast episode. Mike is the director of NOAA's National Hurricane Center in Florida, holding that role since April 2023. Mike has been with the NHC since 2008. He earned a bachelor's in meteorology as well as a master's and PhD in atmospheric science, all from North Carolina State University. Director Brennan, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We know hurricane season's just kicking off, and while there's no storms in the Atlantic, I'm sure it's very busy, probably otherwise. Thanks so much.
Yeah, great to be with you. Yeah, it's a busy time of year, getting ready for what looks to be a busy season.
We will start off with the forecast, of course. Very active season forecasted by the NHC. I believe it was released on May 23rd. 17 to 25 named storms. Those are tropical storms and hurricanes. Out of those, 8 to 13 are hurricanes, 4 to 7 major hurricanes. Now, I'll just say this to throw a few more numbers out. You know, when this goes to averages are about 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. So we're looking for a very active season here. How do you feel going into this season, knowing that you have a forecast like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly concerning, but I think the message to everybody is that regardless of what any seasonal forecast says, you have to prepare every year the same way because the risk is always there. Now, of course, if we have more storms, then those are more opportunities for folks to be affected. But it's sort of a concerned but calm approach. We don't want people to be so alarmed by what is going to be likely a busy hurricane season that they don't get ready for it, because that's the opposite of what we want. And the seasonal forecast is a reminder every year that hurricane season is about to start. It's already starting, and you need to be ready.
Yeah, and compared to forecasts in years past, where does this rank in terms of the actual numbers of storms that are in the forecast?
Yeah, well, for the high end of the range of named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes, this is the highest forecast that NOAA has ever issued for its May forecast. So that's pretty on par with a lot of what other groups have forecast for the season. So everybody's sort of seeing the same signs that we've got a lot of sort of large scale factors that are going to come together that will likely result in a busy year. But as we know, where the storms go, how strong they get, and who they ultimately impact is going to be determined by much shorter term, day-to-day, weather patterns that are going to unfold over the next several months.
Yeah, one of the things I try to remind people is that we could have a reasonable handle and what we think this season might be in terms of activity.
Right.
But trying to say it's going to go to place X or Y, there's just no skill in that. One of the things that I was talking about with some other colleagues is some of the wild cards here, like Saharan dust, right? I would imagine that one of the best ways to keep the numbers down is if we get these big waves of Saharan dust coming off of Africa. Can you talk a little bit about what that does to kind of slow down or inhibit the growth of tropical cyclones?
Yeah, it can have a couple of different effects. First is sort of more indirect in that it can block some of the solar radiation coming in to the sea surface. It can actually result in a little bit of cooling of the ocean water temperatures that we've seen are at or near record highs this year. But secondly, it creates a less favorable sort of thermodynamic environment. It results in a lot of dry, dusty air that can sort of be ingested into a developing storm and sort of choke off a storm's ability to pull in that warm, moist air. And you can end up with things like cold downdrafts and outflow boundaries that can prevent a storm from getting organized, as tropical storms and hurricanes like a warm, moist environment throughout the lower and middle portions of the atmosphere. So if you get a lot of dry air in there, it can sort of choke off that formation.
Just kind of following up on that, though, when you're making the hurricane forecast, like the way I'm seeing this, right? I didn't do the forecast disclaimer, but the way I'm seeing this is, we have going into La Nina, very warm waters in the main development region, which is the tropical Atlantic, for lack of a better word. But is there really anything you're taking into consideration that made you or your team think, well, hey, maybe we won't go this high because of this?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's just confidence. You don't know exactly how La Nina, for example, is going to progress. We're not in La Nina at this point where it's very likely it's going to develop by the time we get to sort of the peak of hurricane season, August, September, October, which is when we typically see most of the activity. But we don't know how strong it's going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take the atmosphere to respond to the oceanic forcing in the Pacific that comes with La Nina. So if it's delayed a little bit and it doesn't really kick in until later in the season, some of those higher end numbers might not be realized. Like you said, we can have other factors come into play. You can have pockets of increased wind shear that can result from features coming down out of the mid latitudes. We talked about Saharan dust. There's all sorts of failure modes that can sort of creep in during a season. But overall, the large scale factors, which are the ones that have predictability on these sort of months, several months of time scale, are all sort of favorable and pointing to an active year. And that would just be a continuation of this sort of very active period we've been in for almost the last 30 years in the Atlantic on the large scale.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about impacts, because so often the wind, the categories, they get so much attention, right?
Yep.
I think we're just starting to do a better job. There's a lot of work to do. And reminding people how dangerous the water is, not just storm surge, but freshwater flooding. Can you speak to those points a little more directly about we shouldn't underestimate the importance of water in a landfalling tropical cyclone?
Yeah, water kills about 85 to 90% of people in the United States from tropical storms and hurricanes. And actually over the last 10 or 11 years, most of it's been due to freshwater flooding from heavy rainfall, which is an equal opportunity hazard. It can happen at the coast. It can happen hundreds of miles away from where a storm makes landfall, well inland. It can happen from, it doesn't take a major hurricane to produce heavy rainfall flooding, just a slow moving system that's going to dump heavy rain or potentially over a prolonged period of time. So it has almost nothing to do with how strong a storm is or the category. It's killed about 55% of the people in the U.S. from tropical storms and hurricanes over the last 10 or 11 years. It's over 200 people. Storm surge, we've seen those numbers overall come down as a proportion of the total fatalities in the last few years, but we lost 41 people in Lee County from Hurricane Ian in 2022. So in a single day, that hazard can still create a tremendous loss of life when you get into those sort of catastrophic storm surge scenarios with the major hurricane landfalls in vulnerable locations. We've lost more people, actually, despite the fact that we had a lot of storm surge fatalities, we've actually lost more people to surf and rip currents than storm surge in the last 10 or 11 years in the United States, especially in Florida, North Carolina, and New Jersey. People get out into the ocean. It's not safe. It might be a sunny day. You might have a hurricane 1,000 miles away producing dangerous ocean conditions. So we really do want to emphasize those water hazards. Wind hazards do kill people. We lose about 10 to 12% of the fatalities come from the winds of the tropical storm or hurricane itself. Those are largely due to tree-related incidents, either trees falling on houses, people outside, or in their cars. So the hazards, go across a wide spectrum, but the vast majority of the fatalities do occur due to water in some way, shape, or form.
So you brought up New Jersey. You make me think, because I know every year there's unfortunately rip current fatalities because of these storms that are so far out. And I also think too, the Northeast, right? We don't see these tropical storms all the time either. I mean, they're nearby, but it's not. I don't know if it's in our psyche as much as it is further south. Where I want to go with this is with the storm surge. I believe you said there were some positive improvements on, not as many fatalities with this. Would you attribute that to, your storm surge graphics that are now operational? I know this was experimental for a few years, but now you can go to the Hurricane Center website and you can see what the forecast storm surge is for your area.
Yeah, we have a lot more products and services that we've dedicated to storm surge over the last, 10 years, precisely because it had historically been the biggest cause of fatalities in hurricanes. So we have a specific warning we issue for storm surge in the United States now that was introduced in 2017 to highlight those areas at risk of life-threatening inundation, which typically talk about 3 feet or higher above ground level. And we have tools that we provide to the emergency management community that show them a reasonable worst-case scenario for storm surge inundation at a given location to help support evacuation decision-making. We have more products that tell EMs and other decision makers about timing information, when they need to call for those evacuations, so they make sure they can get people out in time. So there's been a tremendous focus on that, and that, I think that's been relatively successful over the last few years. We've had multiple Category 4 and Category 5 hurricane landfalls in Florida and along the Gulf Coast, and compared to previous incidents of that magnitude, we've lost a relatively small number of people to the storm surge hazard, especially outside of Ian, which was a tragic event in Lee County, Florida. But outside of that, the storm surge fatality numbers have been less than 10.
All right, so for this year, you've got some new products to roll out to complement the historical things you've done. There's always been a lot of consternation about the cone. The cone means X, the cone means Y. Yeah. It really means this. Or what kind of things have you done this year or are doing this year to kind of nudge the cone, that that lead graphic that most people take home and try to make sense of? What kind of things are you doing to adjust that graphic?
Yeah, the cone is sort of this high level, big picture overview of where the center of the storm is likely to go over the next few days. But this year we're adding some additional hazard information to it for the wind hazard over inland areas. We issue tropical storms and hurricane watches and warnings in the United States at the coast and at times well inland. And they haven't historically been on our cone graphic product, but we're rolling out an experimental version of the cone in around mid-August timeframe that'll start to show those to better depict that wind hazard and also remind people that those hazards do and often do extend outside the cone itself, and to make it a more hazard-focused graphic. There's additional hazard products like we talked about for flooding and for storm surge. We can't get them all onto one product. It would be a little too hard for everybody to digest. But by making this incremental step with the cone, making it a little more hazard-focused, will remind people again that those hazards can and often do extend outside the cone itself.
Following up on the cone, I wanted to ask this. I actually wanted to ask you this last year, but I couldn't make a podcast. So right now, the cone is defined as a 2/3 error, right? So 66% probability of the cone or the storm center being in the cone. But,
right.
Given how much improvement we have seen over the past decades, I believe it's like a decade in terms of, 5 days accuracy now is 4 days 10 years ago. You think it's time to change that cone from maybe 66% probability to 75 or 80, or I don't know what numbers you have tossed out there, but just to give people a little more confidence. So just in case on those times where it falls outside of the cone, maybe we can make it a little more encompassing.
Yeah, that's something we're looking at in combination with, we're working on extending forecast out to 7 days from 5. And that's something we have to look at, is how do you present that sort of very long range, track forecast information. I don't think we want to necessarily put a dot on the map for a 7-day position forecast. So we need to figure out some way to depict that longer term uncertainty and then marry that up with what we're doing with the cone. So yeah, it's possible we might decide to use a different percentile for the cone, or try to depict multiple percentile areas with the cone, say sort of an inner and outer area. That's something we're going to start looking at and start socializing, but we want to sort of make changes very gradually. We don't want to make big sudden changes, too many changes at once. because the cone graphic is so institutionalized and is so recognizable that we want to be very mindful about changing it so that we don't end up changing it, too many times or make changes that we then have to roll back.
Understood. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back on the other side with more from Mike Brennan from the National Hurricane Center. You're listening to the Across the Sky podcast.
Hey everyone, Across the Sky is proudly sponsored by Weather Call Services. Don't be caught off guard by severe weather. Choose Weather Call. Get precise location-specific alerts via phone, text, or email. With over a decade of experience, Weather Call delivers pinpoint accuracy for your exact address, ensuring no surprises. Take charge and stay prepared when ominous skies loom. Explore the Weather Call difference today. Visit weathercallservices.com/Lee Enterprises and safeguard yourself, your business, or any school that matters to you. You can also find that link in our Across the Sky show notes, weathercallservices.com/Lee Enterprises.
And we are back here with our Across the Sky podcast. Hey, new episodes every Monday, by the way. If you're interested, download and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We have great guests like we do today. Mike Brennan, director of the National Hurricane Center. Sean, I'll pitch it over to you. I know you had a question for the director here. Floor is yours.
Yeah, because it has been so much more active very recently, there's been a lot more discussion about what the climate signal is. As the climate warms, obviously the air, the water are warming, and this does have an impact. There's also some secondary things in the literature we've seen about the forward speed slowing down and some of them being stronger farther northward or poleward. There's also things about rapid intensification, because that's a big issue if something intensifies very rapidly 12 or 24 hours before landfall. So where's kind of the science in these things nowadays over the past few years?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of work that's being done in those areas. It's looking into how tropical storm and hurricanes frequency, intensity, geographic distribution might change in warming climate scenarios. But a lot of the work is still pretty preliminary, and it's not necessarily overly conclusive, and it's not the same in the Atlantic basin as it might be in the West Pacific or the Eastern Pacific. So in the Atlantic, there are some signs that we might be seeing a little more rapid intensification a little more often. There are some indications that in a warming climate, we might see fewer storms overall, but stronger storms in proportion to the number of storms we get, but maybe only a little bit stronger, almost just strong enough that we wouldn't necessarily even be able to measure it within the uncertainty that we have today of analyzing how strong a hurricane is, which is only good to within about 10%. What we are more confident in, and what the research is more confidently showing, is that the water hazards are going to get worse. First, we have sea level rise ongoing, so storm surge is getting worse in many locations, because sea level is higher now than it was 20 years ago, and 20 years from now, it's going to be higher than it is now. So that's raising the base level of water that the storm surge happens on top of. So that's worsening the storm surge risk and exposing new areas to storm surge that may not have been vulnerable to it in the past. The other thing we're seeing is increased rainfall rates. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. We're seeing higher rainfall rates, which are leading to more pronounced flooding in tropical storms and hurricanes, and also in other weather systems. So again, those are the two things that the research is more sort of more consistently showing that will continue to get worse with time in a warming climate, so that even the same hurricane that we might have 20 or 30 years from now with the same intensity, same track, same structure will likely generate worse water hazards than it does now.
Let me ask you this, what's more, and I'm sure the answers are both, but, what's more top of mind, the climate change aspect of this and, rising waters and increased precipitation, or the fact that we see more and more people just moving closer to the coast? I mean, here in New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, it almost looks like little cities up and down the shore with how tightly packed things are, and the sidewalks and the pavements and the lack of grass or surfaces that the water can see through.
Yeah, you've got all those factors kind of coming together. The climate, the warming climate is sort of this slow, change that's happening, relative to what's happening in any one individual year with any individual storm. But yeah, you do have this sort of continued migration of people and their things to hurricane-prone areas. You can look at population changes in Florida and other locations. where you're increasing the risk simply because you just have more people in hurricane-prone areas. And so there's always this continual race between, how much better can the physical science get in our ability to forecast and warn and properly get people ready for these storms versus the increased population, the increased infrastructure that requires, longer time to evacuate, longer lead times for decision-making, and simply the fact that you have more people in harm's way.
And following up on that, one thing I hear of, a number of times as I talk to emergency managers on the local and county level is that you have people who have second homes at the shore, third homes at the shore, where, they're not always aware of what's happening at the coast, even though they own property there. And then, hey, hurricanes coming, especially, and I hate to just bring up New Jersey 1,000 times, but especially in Sandy, which was an off-season storm, and it's late October, people have settled back in their lives back inland. And then this comes, the messaging part is always hard from an emergency management perspective. What's your take on that? And, for those people who live in these towns or work in these towns where they have to let the public know, hey, hurricane's coming to your second home, or you might be on vacation and you have a storm come.
Yeah, it's always a struggle. Even when you have a permanent population, you have people moving into areas that are hurricane prone from places they didn't have hurricanes before. So there's this continual re-education and communication effort that has to happen every season with every storm. Yeah, it's a reminder there's people all up and down the coastline that have property that they need to take care of. But again, it's a good reminder that, you need to be paying attention. You need the hurricane season lasts all the way from June through November for a reason. And just because you get to September, October, a little farther north doesn't mean you can't have impacts. But yeah, it's always a continual education effort of your existing population in a place where they may not have had an impact in a while. And then also that education of your population that is moving into these hurricane-prone regions.
Yeah, to that end, if there is somebody who is relatively new to the coastline or maybe 5 or 10 miles inland, maybe they don't live right on the ocean front, but they live in a coastal community, and maybe they're new there. What are some of the things that you would suggest they be on the lookout for, or some preparations they should do now if this is their first hurricane season, just 5 or 10 miles from the coast?
Yeah, the first thing is know your risk from the various hazards. And that really starts by knowing whether you live in a storm surge evacuation zone, which can extend tens of miles inland from the coast in certain locations. You don't just have to live on the beach. But if you might be asked to leave your home in advance of a storm, that sort of forms the basis of your entire preparation plan, because you need to know how you're going to evacuate, where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, what you're going to take with you, how you're going to help your friends and loved ones who might need assistance evacuating. And it's really important in a lot of places. You don't have to drive 100 or hundreds of miles inland to get away from the storm surge danger. You might only have to drive 10 miles or 50 miles in some cases. But again, make evacuation an achievable goal for you and your friends and family, so that you don't have to. For example, in Florida, there's a perception you have to drive all the way out of the state to get away from a hurricane. That's just not the case. And again, it's knowing your hazards. Do you live in a flood-prone area inland, near a river or stream or creek, or in an area prone to flash flooding? What is your home going to be able to stand up to in terms of wind? What's your home built for in terms of its wind rating? Do you live in a mobile home where you might be asked to evacuate for a tropical storm even? So there's lots of different, everybody's risk profile is very individualized. So you have to start by, understanding that, because that's going to help you prepare and understand what you need to do to get ready for a potential event.
Yeah, I'm assuming most of that is kind of local information, but is there any help from the federal level on understanding those risks, let's say from FEMA?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to ready.gov and the ready.gov/plan. You have information about how to plan, how to come up with a family emergency plan, family emergency kit. From there, you can, it's important to find links to your local, state, and local emergency management offices. They will have things like storm surge evacuation maps and zones, so that you know what zone you might live in, how that's going to be communicated to you in an event, what the evacuation routes are. So it's a federal all the way down to a local effort to make sure people are ready. And it's important now to have that plan in place, have those supplies ready, so you're not scrambling to pull all that together when a storm starts to threaten your area.
I know we're almost out of time with you, so I'll end with this. You have the public going to hurricanes.gov. What's your elevator pitch to somebody about what links they should look at once they get to the main website and how to find the information that they need?
Yeah, well, if you come to hurricanes.gov, you're going to see a big map with all the storms on it, and then each storm underneath it will have the information there. So you have to look at multiple products. We have, again, you want to start off with that storm surge watch warning. If you live in a storm surge prone area, that's going to highlight those areas at risk for life-threatening inundation. We have maps that show flash flooding risk, tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings from the wind perspective, timing information for when those tropical storm force winds might arrive at your given location. But then that's just sort of the big picture with the hurricane. You're going to want to drill down to your local National Weather Service office at weather.gov. You can put in your zip code or your town that you live in, and you can get localized information there, the watches and warnings in effect for your area. And you want to find those local sources of trusted information from your local broadcast meteorologist, your state and local government and emergency management officials. Follow them on social media. Start finding them now so that, again, those are the people you're going to turn to when a storm threatens.
Yeah, you have a lot of coordination going on with the local offices, and I think sometimes that's lost. But I just want to reiterate that they're very hardworking men and women at these offices across the country that coordinate with the Hurricane Center, that are doing what they can to help the people in the local communities. Joe, thanks, man.
Oh, I was just going to turn it over to you, Director. The floor is yours if you want any closing thoughts here.
Yeah, just a couple of quick reminders. It doesn't take a major hurricane making landfall or even a hurricane making landfall in your area to have there be major impacts, especially from those water hazards, storm surge, heavy rainfall, flooding. And then one last thing I'll touch on is we lose almost as many people to what we call indirect deaths after hurricane impacts as we do from the direct forces of the storm itself. Things like carbon monoxide poisoning, car accidents, heat-related issues, cardiac arrest, cleanup accidents. So it's a reminder to be safe after the storm. Don't go back into areas that have been damaged until you've been cleared to do so by your local officials. And we want to make sure that we survive the hurricane and the aftermath of the event.
Thank you, Director, so much for the time. We appreciate it and coming on the Across the Sky podcast.
Thanks so much.
Another really informative episode with Director Brennan. It's always good to hear from someone in his position. He will be super busy going into the season. And, like we said at the beginning, it only takes one for it to be active in your neighborhood. And we're going to hope that for all of you who are listening, that it does not be active by you.
Yeah, and I think what he did a good job of driving home, as we all want to do, who talk about weather and impacts, is that water is a big, big hazard, especially just a mile or two inland from the coast. It's not just the storm surge, but the heavy rain that leads to the freshwater flooding, especially in areas like the Jersey Shore or other urbanized coastal locations like Hampton Roads or Jacksonville or Miami or Charleston, South Carolina. There's a lot of pavement. The water runs off of that in a hurry. So even if you don't have a bunch of storm surge, you still get flooding of tributary and streams and rivers. And that's the kind of stuff that can last a long, long time because it takes a while for all that water to run off. And as the climate warms, you're going to have more precipitation as there's more evaporation. So these are the things, we don't want to turn a blind eye to the wind damage. Obviously, it's a massive issue. But on the longer term, water is another big, big hazard.
Absolutely. I want to drop this stat too here, and this just shows how good we've gone at forecasting the track of hurricanes. Our 5-day forecast this decade, so the first couple of years of this decade, of course, are as accurate as a 30-hour forecast was in the 1980s, John. That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about multiplier of increased accuracy. Really, once we got into the 90s is when we saw this error track decrease and decrease and decrease. But even 2000, I'll just say this, 2020s, a 5-day forecast in the 2020s is as accurate as a 3-day forecast was in the 2000s. I mean, you look back at some of these forecast cones, if you're a weather guy like us, you might do that every once in a while. And they were big back then. They were wide. Yeah. Even Sandy, again, being in New Jersey, that's the one I think of. You look at the forecast cone, like, man, big area that was covering. We don't have not so much with that anymore, but impacts can happen outside of the cone. That's also important to say. But the track has got a lot better with the forecast.
Yeah, the track is a lot better. And that is important. That's, the front page of any of this stuff, anytime there's a hurricane threatening. But now we've got to start thinking about, okay, we know where the center is probably going to be, but then we've got to think about, okay, well, if the eye wall hits here by 5 or 10 miles, I mean, how it can always be better, right? We have a really good handle on about where it's going to go. The stuff that still needs more work is the intensity forecasting, especially with the rapid intensification that we've seen these last 2 or 3 years. I mean, the science is still out there, but man, there's a lot of work being done right now on rapid intensification, understanding beyond just the high levels. Okay, well, we know generally kind of why we have rapid intensification, light winds, very warm water, but there's also structural things inside of a hurricane that we're still learning. We had, somebody from Colorado State earlier on in the season to talk about this. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done still on intensity forecasting. But yeah, the position is the first thing. That's key. But the intensity forecasting always could be better as well.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, let's wrap it up like we do every week with Across My Sky. Joe, what's happening across your sky?
We're going to go to the amusement park this weekend. We're going to go to Busch Gardens and do some coasters. Down in Williamsburg, Virginia, they've redesigned or kind of refurbished the Loch Ness Monster there at Busch Gardens, which was the first coaster I ever rode in 1980. So I'm planning to do that with my kids. Of course, I say kids, they're in their 20s. So we're going to do that this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's great, Sean. That's great. I wasn't born in the 1980s.
I wasn't born in the 1980s either there, Chief.
But that is true. But I'm just saying. I'm glad the roller coaster's still there. It's good memory. You pass it on to your kids for sure.
Uh-huh.
All right. This isn't like a regional thing. At least I don't think so. But I always get confused in how to word summer this time of the year.
Yeah.
Because Memorial Day weekend, a lot of advertisements say summer's here, and I get it because it is, but summer doesn't officially start astronomically until June 21st ish this year. I don't even know what day it is. Let's say June 21st ish. Climatological summer, the hottest 3 months of the season, begins June 1, ends August 31st. So that last week of May is just really confusing for me how to word things, especially up the Jersey Shore where we're all about this season, but what do you call this season? Do you say it's the unofficial start to summer? Do you just say it's beach season? I don't know, Sean. You got any advice for me on this one?
This is a challenge in wording. Yes, I've kind of come to this idea, the traditional summer travel season.
Okay.
That's kind of where I go with that. I go, it's time. It's the start of the traditional summer travel season.
Right.
It's a lot of words, but I think we can kind of break that apart a little bit because, June, July, August, 3 hottest months of the year. That's meteorological summer. We got, June 2021st to the end to 2021st September, astronomical summer. So there's all these things. I will say this. I'm going to get my old man card out now, Joe.
1980s.
I don't like official start of summer because there's no season police.
That is true. There isn't. Maybe the Associated Press. Are they the season police?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, but I always try to call whichever summer is summer. Yes, the default is astronomical summer because that's what people grew up with as kids. But, it's hot. It's hot. It's hot. It's that time of year when it's...
Summer solstice this year, June 20th. And if our conversation didn't our conversation, I think, just told you what we as meteorologists think summer is, because we didn't know the summer solstice date, but we did know June 1st was the start of climatological summer. All right, so we're looking ahead, and we actually have pretty much all of our episodes at least planned out through the end of July, which is great. So you will definitely be getting new episodes every Monday here. Of course, we had a great episode last Monday with Jen Carfagno from the Weather Channel talking about just traveling on a dime. Hey, the next day you have to go halfway across the country or whatever.
All the way across the country.
All the way, right. Or all the way
from Atlanta to the Sierras in a night.
And I can't believe she has to book all of that travel herself. I mean,
man,
it's good for the Delta Sky Miles for sure.
Oh, she was funny. She was loving on Delta, wasn't she?
She did. I would too if I were her. Anyway, next Monday we have Kimberly McMahon. She's going to talk about NOAA's heat risk. It's been around in the West since 2017, actually in California since 2013. But it's poised to move eastward this year and kind of assign a category or a risk level to how hot it is in your neighborhood. So we have that. On the 17th, we're going to do the top 10 things to know about summer, and we're going to keep going on and on from there. I will say this too, being that this is a hurricane season episode, Hurricane Hunt, season 2, Sean and I, we are back. We are giving, we'll say longer discussions about hurricanes and tropical systems that are around. They come out as needed, more frequently when it's storms approaching the coast of the United States, less frequently as it's out towards the open Atlantic. But be on the lookout for that. And you can just look up Hurricane Hunt, Joe and Sean on your favorite search engine. You'll see it there. is you subscribe to one of our Lee Enterprises websites, Richmond Times-Dispatch, where Sean's home is, Press of Atlantic City for me. You'll find it there as well. Sean, any closing thoughts as we wrap this?
No, it's a good episode. It's always nice to have Director Brennan. He's a Virginia guy. He's from Roanoke, Virginia, where I worked for a long time. So it was good to catch up with him too.
This just goes to show Sean is like 2 degrees of separation away from all meteorologists.
I scare myself sometimes.
Anyway, hope everyone has a great week. We'll be back with you next Monday. Thanks again for listening to the Across the Sky podcast.
Ah, the sizzle of McDonald's sausage. It's enough to make you crave your favorite breakfasts. Enough to head over to McDonald's. Enough to make you really wish this commercial were scratch and sniff.
And if you're a sausage person, now get 2 satisfyingly savory sausage McGriddles, sausage biscuits, or sausage burritos for just $3.33. Or mix and match. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.